happy Thursday morning to all the administrators, faculty, and personnel of the CEAP member schools all over the Philippines. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am Sister Aileen Bonifacio, SPC, and I will be your moderator today. Welcome to this webinar on Busting the Myths of Martial Law, a webinar conceived after the well-received and highly evaluated Day 3 of our 2022 CEAP National JIPG Conference last March 16 on good governance as a root of justice and peace. CEAP deemed it necessary to have this sort of sequel seminar so we can continue correcting the myths that many people believed about our Philippine history, specifically those that relate to the martial law regime and are believed by many people. Before we continue, let us begin our session with an opening prayer. We will pray the prayer for elections. Let us remember that we are always in the presence of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Prayer for the elections. Let us pray that the forthcoming national and local elections may truly reflect the will of the Lord who guides the destinies of nations. For every petition, let us pray together. Deliver us, Lord.
Deliver us, Lord.
From coercion, intimidation, violence, and terrorism.
Deliver us, Lord.
From dishonesty, lies, and all distortion of truth.
Deliver us, Lord.
From bribery, graft, and all conspiracy for fraud.
Deliver us, Lord.
From gullibility to the deceptive and blindness of perspective.
Deliver us, Lord.
From threats, intimidation, and perverse language.
Deliver us, Lord.
Let us pray together. Hear us, Lord.
Hear us, Lord.
That conscience may always be our ultimate norm.
Hear us, Lord.
That the common good may always be our highest goal.
Hear us, Lord.
That human dignity may be respected all the time.
Hear us, Lord.
That the poor and the weak may always have the priority.
Hear us, Lord.
That care for creation may never be ignored.
Hear us, Lord.
That solidarity may guide the path of peace and development.
Hear us, Lord.
That genuine fear of God and love of neighbors may guide those who seek public office.
Hear us, Lord.
Let us pray.
Shepherd of souls and Savior of the nations.
Politics is your gift to us.
A call to serve others and grow in holiness.
Guide our politics as you guide our lives.
May our political engagement for voters and candidates
bring glory to your loving name.
And help us grow in holiness forever and ever.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning once again. For those who just tuned in with us, we welcome you to this webinar on Busting the Myths of Martial Law. Again, this is a byproduct of the Day 3 of our 2022 CEAP National JIPG Conference last March 16. We are live both on the CEAP Facebook page and the CEAP channel on YouTube. To begin, allow me to give you some reminders. First, as the talk is ongoing, we encourage you to post your questions or comments at the comment section on Facebook and YouTube, and we will ask these questions or read the comments during the Q&A portion. Second, On certificates, please be informed that you will receive the certificate of attendance only upon completion of the evaluation form. And take note of this, the link has already been posted as part of the caption of this video, both on YouTube and Facebook. But please note that the link will only go live after this session and will remain open only until 5 p.m. today. So if you click it now, it's not going to open yet. We encourage you to answer the evaluation form and you will receive your certificate of attendance within 3 to 5 days. And finally, please be reminded as well that this is a free webinar. We are giving this to you for free, but if you want to pay it forward, you may donate to our Kapatirang Kamagong Fund. It is our fund for helping the poor and struggling CEAP mission schools. Lastly, we encourage you to share this webinar to your networks with the hashtags #CEAP Cares, #I Love Catholic Ed, and #CEAP GeepG. So we have 139 viewers. So my dear viewers, please share this live webinar in your different group chats and in your pages as well. Last March 16, our speaker was introduced by the chairperson of the CEAP Subcommittee for Justice and Peace, Dr. Loretta Castro of Miriam College. Let me read some lines from her introduction before we give the virtual floor to our resource person. Dr. Maria Serena Diokno, fondly called Maris, is a renowned and highly respected historian. Apelyido pa lang ay nare-recall ko na sa mga minememorize ko noon sa current events. And a truth advocate all her life. Dr. Maris Diokno is Professor Emeritus of History from the University of the Philippines, where she also served as Vice President for Academic Affairs from 1999 to 2006. She was a former chairperson of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. But in 2016, she resigned from the commission in protest to the burial of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos at the libingan ng mga bayani. Dr. Maris Diokno is a distinguished academic and an engaged citizen, but above all, she is a Filipino who deeply loves our country. Last March 16, she challenged all of us Catholic educators to put on primacy on evidences and values. We do not just ask our students to like and dislike, but we ask them why and give opinions based on evidences and values for us Catholic educators. Her parting words was a challenge for us to choose leaders who are honest, decent, and able to stand for our country. Dear viewers, let us once again welcome a Ghostbuster. With open ears and hearts, we listen to Dr. Maria Serena Diokno on busting the myths of martial law.
Sa CEAP, maraming salamat sa inyong paanyaya na makausapin, magkwento na naman tayo ulit ngayong umaga. So please allow me, I will just share my screen. Okay. Can you see my slides? Hello, can you see the slide? Yes, all right, thank you. So I decided to focus on two things. One, the first part is about how our textbooks in grade 6 teach martial law. Kasi mga educators tayo, so siguro mahalagang makita rin natin ito. Tapos yung pangalawang bahagi ay tungkol sa mga mito, no? Mga istorya ng martial law na kinakalat-kalat sa social media. So for the purpose of the textbooks, let me begin by saying that my colleagues, Dr. Kirby Alvarez, Francisco Guiang, Don D. Ramos, and Aaron Viernes, and I, all from the UP History Department, we embarked on a project to review 7 Araling Panlipunan textbooks of grade 5 and 7 textbooks of grade 6. This is a project that was organized by the Far Eastern University, the FEU Public Policy Center. And the concern was really to look at how Araling Panlipunan is being taught, what kinds of textbooks are being used, and so on. So we looked at 7 textbooks, 6 that were used in 6 different private schools, and the 7th being the textbook of the DepEd. Ang focus ko ngayong umaga, dahil ang martial law ang ating pinag-uusapan, ay yung grade 6 na textbook kasi doon tinatalakay ang batas militar. So when we looked at the 7 textbooks, we found that the section on martial law ranges from 7 to 11% of the total number of pages of the textbook. We find this small. Why? Well, for several reasons. If you look at the way history is taught sa grades 5 and 6, ang foundation story ng ating kasaysayan is that our history has been a struggle for freedom. And when you approach history from that way, freedom as a nation and as a people. So when you approach history that way, that implies that at the end of the year, alam ng mga estudyante kung ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng isang bansa, what a nation means, and more importantly, what it means to be free. Now, if that is the overall or the fundamental story of our history, then certainly the history of martial law plays a very crucial role in that narrative. Not only because it is fairly recent, having happened, 50 years ago, the imposition, but I think more because since the war, this martial law has been the single most crucial, challenge to our freedoms and our sovereignty as a people. Of course, this is not to say wala tayong hinaharap na hamon ngayon kasi alam naman natin lahat na napakalaki ang hinaharap nating hamon, lalo na sa darating na Mayo. So, looking at the discussion, we think that the section on martial law should be at least doubled from 7 to 11% of the textbook to at least 20% of the grade 6 textbook. We also found that, albeit in varying degrees, the textbooks generally agree that martial law was authoritarian rule and that it had negative effects. Ang concern lang namin is that there are many interpretations or conclusions that are presented in the textbook without evidence. And ang concern namin, katulad ng binanggit ni Sister Aileen kanina, yung talagang lagi kong dinidiin, ay yung kahalagahan ng ebidensya. Kasi yun lang at tanging iyon ang magiging basehan ng ating interpretasyon, konklusyon, or anumang aralin na tinuturo sa classroom. So for example, we found a near absence of economic data about the period. No tables, no statistical figures about the economy during the period of martial law. And yet, conclusions are readily made about economic progress or even economic crisis. The fourth finding we have, which I will explain in a while, has to do with the practice of both sides system, a term that I will explain shortly, but we find that it is practiced in the textbook so that textbook writers appear, quote, neutral or objective. Fifth, we also found silences in the textbooks. Virtually nothing is stated about Marcos plunder, notwithstanding several Supreme Court as well as Sandigan Bayan decisions about the ill-gotten wealth. Movements that were opposing martial law, again, the description is very thin, very superficial. What is also worrisome for us is our sixth finding that textbook writers tend to treat the study of martial law as a matter of opinion or perspective. So pag ganyan ang tingin mo, then nobody is correct, nobody is wrong. Because everybody with the teacher or the students will just say, yan ang opinion mo, yan ang opinion ko, we're entitled to that. But of course, what we want to emphasize is that there are facts, and some of these facts do not appear in the textbooks. Finally, and this is very important, given the massive scale of mis- and disinformation in social media, we find that critical thinking skills are hardly developed. And when the textbook writers attempt to solicit merely opinions, they do not at the same time help develop the learner's ability to gather evidence, evaluate the evidence, listen to opinions, evaluate the opinions, and so on. Now, mind you, lahat ng mga kakayahan na ito ay nakalista, detalyadong nakalista sa curriculum ng Araling Panlipunan na ginawa ng DepEd noong Mayo 2016 pa. Yun ang tinatawag na gabay sa curriculum ng Araling Panlipunan mula K hanggang 12. At naka-spelling doon ang mga kakayahang ito. Ngunit sa aming pag-aaral, nakita namin na hindi ito tinuturo. So let's give some examples. Let's start with the reasons that the textbook writers offer for the imposition of martial law. I have to say that we had a problem looking at this portion of the textbooks because some writers tended to conflate reasons for imposing martial law with events leading to the imposition of martial law, with events preceding the imposition of martial law. In history, these are not all the same thing. A cause is not necessarily an antecedent event or an event that preceded the major event. But we just lumped them together as reasons for imposition of martial law, and we listed them down here. Now, you will find that the most frequently mentioned reasons for imposing martial law, yung mga protesta laban sa oil price hike, ang problema sa Mindanao, yung banta from the communists, meron din yung Plaza Miranda bombing, binanggit din yung Enrile ambush, rampant criminality, drug use. These were also the reasons that Mr. Marcos himself cited to justify the imposition of martial law. So you will find them all in the textbooks. What we do not find very much of would be, for example, the proposed limit on the president's term, which was being drafted by the 1971 Constitutional Convention na natigil ito eh. Kumbaga, sa gitna ng deliberations at paghahanda nila para matapos yung kanilang trabaho ay inimpose ang martial law. So, syempre, ang naging resulta nito ay wala na, no? And then, of course, very important din, yung ambisyon ni Ginoong Marcos Sr. na manatili sa kapangyarihan. You will find that only 2 textbooks mention that. So the quality of their mention or explanation varies. For example, regarding the reasons for the imposition of martial law, the most commonly cited reasons echo Marcos's own justification. But his desire to stay in power beyond the constitutional term limit, at that time it was the 1935 Constitution, was cited by only 2 writers, 2 textbooks. And binanggit pa siya as the viewpoint of some historians. In other words, I'll give you an example. Dinistansya ng mga textbook writers yung sarili nilang tingin sa tingin ng mga historiador. And then, Mr. Marcos's justifications were wholly embraced by 2 textbooks. Tungkol naman sa ambush ni Enrile, 3 textbooks did not mention it. 2 mentioned it but never questioned the veracity, kung talaga bang nangyari ito. Okay? And the other 2 treated the ambush as fake. Now, silences in the textbooks. Okay, the 1973 Constitution is mentioned by 6 out of 7, but is really analyzed by only 2. yung ratification, by ratification of the 1973 Constitution. Kung naalala nyo, ito yung mga citizen assemblies kung saan walang voters list, pati mga 15-year-old pinayagan, quote, bumoto o mag-ratify ng 1973 Constitution. Walang record, show of hands lang sa lahat ng barangay ng Pilipinas. It was analyzed by only one. 5 textbooks did not even mention it at all. And one mentioned it very briefly. Yung ill-gotten wealth ng mga Marcos, hindi ito binanggit ng 6 na textbook. Iisa lamang and very briefly mentioned. Yung mga programa ng New Society, 2 presented the programs exactly as Mr. Marcos did. Walang analysis. I'll give you an example soon. 1 textbook assessed these programs positively. The rest were more critical. Yung lifting of martial law, if you notice, lifting is in quotation marks because even if martial law was supposedly lifted in 1981, Mr. Marcos retained his power to legislate. Kahit na kuno may batasan, he still legislated as if he had the power of both legislature and the executive, no? Although, quote, lifted daw ang martial law. And then yung opposition sa batas militar, we noticed a tendency to focus on individuals rather than on organizations or movements, which we think does a disservice. Kasi marami ang sumali, lumahok sa opposition sa martial law. Hindi lumalabas ang mga pangalan nila sa textbook. Pero sana kung susuriin yung mga kilusan o organisasyon nila, then magkakaroon sila ng muka. So here are some examples. The 2 textbooks focused on the New Society programs as Marcos did. Walang discussion ng halaga ng mga programa nito, ang success or lack of success, ang impact. So para pinamemorize lang sa estudyante yung pledges. Yun ang pangalan ng New Society programs ni Ginoong Marcos. Shown also on the screen is a sample of a positive assessment of the programs, quote, upang patunayan na sa pamamagitan ng batas militar ay makakaroon ng makabuluhang pagbabago, then in-enumerate ang mga ginawa. Pinaalis ang mga kawaning tiwali at mapang-abuso, pinarusahan ang drug pusher, nagtakda ng curfew, binuhay ang diwa ng pagiging makabayan. Imagine, sa pamamagitan ng slogan, isang bansa, isang diwa. We all know that reciting the slogan doesn't make one patriotic. But anyway, sinanay ang mga Pilipino na maging mas tunurin at disiplinado and so on. So our concern is when these programs are simplistically assessed as such, then when the test comes, ipamemorize lang ito at sasabihin sa bata, enumerate. And exactly, kailan dapat ang enumeration kasi yun ang nasa textbook. How was Marcos Plunder treated? Well, only 1 textbook mentions it. Ganito pa yung kanyang mention. Naging usap-usapan. So parang hindi siya sure. Naging usap-usapan din ang maranyang pamumuhay ng pamilya, kamag-anakan at mga malalapit na kaibigan ni Marcos. Kaya pinaniwalaan, nagnakaw. Walang mention that there are decisions ng Supreme Court. Pag sabihin mong decision ng Korte Suprema, hindi na yan usap-usapan. Hindi na yan paniwala. Okay, yun ay isang desisyon. At kung umabot siya sa antas ng Korte Suprema, ibig sabihin na exhaust na lahat ng mga antas sa baba. Okay, mula sa lowest court hanggang pataas. So, nasalang na yan. And yon ang naging desisyon ng Korte Suprema. Even the chapters on the post-EDSA governments did not discuss the market plunder, except for 1 textbook, and quite briefly at that. So what do we know? Of course, we know there is evidence on the left, for example, yung invoice, one day, on July 20, 1978, Mrs. Marcos, to her secretary, Ms. Vilma Bautista, decided to go shopping in Bulgaria and spent $1,431,000 on jewelry. Makikita natin nakalista dyan. Kung titingnan natin yung accumulated salaries ng mag-asawa, mula 1966 to 1986, yun ay million pesos. Okay? Now remember, ang tinutukoy natin 1978. Itong kabuuang halagang ito ay hanggang 1986. So dapat hanggang 1978 lang. Pero okay lang, sige, pagbigyan na natin 2.319 million. So ang total salary from 66 to 86 at the exchange rate in 1978 was $60,000. Aber, paano nabili yung $1,431,000? Saan kaya nakuha yung pera? So there is a discrepancy of $1.37 million. Kung titingnan natin yung income nila, ibig sabihin, hindi lang yung sweldo, kung hindi yung ibang business ng mag-asawa, ang claim is that in 1984, ang total income ay 16 million. In pesos, dated 1978, that's 426,000. Sorry, in dollars, $426,000. And yet, ang ginastos noong 1978 ay 1.4 million. So, may discrepancy ng higit sa $1 million. Now, these are not stated at all in the textbooks, and the Supreme Court has ruled that ill-gotten wealth means acquired assets that are evidently, manifestly disproportionate to salaries as government officials. That's why importante yung SALN. Kasi sa Statement of Assets and Liabilities, ililista mo doon, hindi lang yung sweldo mo, kung hindi lahat ng iyong ibang mga properties and income. Kung may dividendo, may stock, etc. Ang problema is sa buong panunungkulan ng mag-asawang Marcos, ni isang SALN, wala silang final. Okay? So, kung pagbabasehan yung sweldo, imposible talaga na nakapaggastos ng ganoong pera na binase sa kanilang government salaries or even according to their other reported income. Now, when you talk about falsehood as a spectrum, this really is incorrect because alam naman natin, a lie is a lie, whether partial or full. But, given the range of sophisticated mis- and disinformation, let's plot on a spectrum the methods of lying or falsehood. So at one extreme, you have the fabrication of facts. When you fabricate facts, ibig sabihin talagang nag-iimbento ka. Hindi yun fact, sinasabi mong fact. Or ito yung picture, tinanggal mo yung picture at pinalitan mo ng ibang mukha. Or ito yung bilang, sa halip ng 10, ginawa mong 5. Okay? This is what is called, at one end, actual invention of facts. At the other end, yung tinatawag na partial truth. What is partial truth? This is where you underemphasize evidence. So baka banggitin mo pero slight mention, hindi mo talagang pinapansin, partial lang, or worse, you omit it. Hindi mo binabanggit. So ang nakikita lang na picture sa textbook or sa libro ay isang bahagi lamang, hindi yung kabuuan. At bakit? Well, iniiwasang ipakita ito dahil kontra siya sa sarili mong tingin. Halimbawa, partial truth also means being selective with not just the facts or statistics, but also being selective with the context. Tinitwist yung context para magkaroon ng ibang kahulugan. No, alam natin yan, yung konteksto ng statement halimbawa ng anak ni VP Lenny na kanya daw yung video taken totally out of context nung time na lumabas yung fake video about Senator Laila de Lima, and many of the women came out and said, ako yon. Everyone said ako yon, and thus was born the movement Every Woman. Okay? But you take it out of context and say, see, siya yun. I mean, totally taken out of context. When words are used to twist facts, or another example of a partial truth is you present your interpretation or conclusion as a fact. Okay, they're not the same. Or you reduce history to a matter of opinion, and we will give some examples. Now, in the middle of this, in between the one extreme of inventing facts to the other extreme of being selective, of choosing your facts, somewhere in the middle is what is called both side system. You present both sides, okay, because you want to appear neutral or objective. Okay, so this is the meaning. The term both side system began to be used muna in media. Now, it was used to describe the efforts by media to find a second angle on a story so that they will appear fair. Kahit na yung anggulong yon ay nagbibigay ng kredibilidad sa isang panig na absolutely walang kredibilidad or basis. Pero pinipilit yung side na yon para lumabas sila na, oh, you see, I'm fair. I present two sides. Then lumipat siya sa politics, yung paggamit ng termino sa politics. In politics, you shy away from condemning a condemnable action. Kasi sasabihin mo, pareho naman silang mali. So hindi mo kino-condemn. The best example that I can think of would be when Trump was president of the US. And there was this rally by white supremacists, who some of them were outright Nazi advocates. They marched in Charlottesville in the U.S. and it turned violent. I think one woman was killed in the course of that rally. And when Trump was asked about it, instead of condemning the action, ang sagot niya is, oh, they are fine people on both sides. Okay. And then we find it now being used in education, attempting to appear objective or balanced. You know, you present both sides on the wrong assumption that both sides are equally valid. Yun ang delikado. The assumption that both sides are equally valid. If you read the literature now, sometimes they will not use the term both sidesism, but what aboutism? Somebody will tell you something, and then instead of taking a position, you will say, oh, what about this other side? And you focus on someone else's misconduct, implying that all criticism is invalid because no one naman is blameless. Everybody is at fault. So yun ang tinatawag na what aboutism. Here is an example. Sometimes it is also called false balance. When journalists present opposing view sides, showing the when one is more equal than the evidence actually allows. So here is an example of this is a cartoon of a false balance, a fake balance. There's actually no balance because there's no evidence for one side, but you want to present both to be, quote, equal. What are the effects of both sidesism? There are three serious effects, especially in terms of values. The first is what is called false moral equivalence, meaning you tolerate all views, you dismiss none. Everything is okay, everything is correct. Why? And that's your opinion, you're entitled to it. So everybody is both sides are morally equivalent to one another, even when they are not. The other effect would be moral relativism, where you refrain yourself from pointing out what is wrong, thereby avoiding or implicitly supporting the condemnable side. And then, of course, skepticism. It is a view that, well, bias naman parehong sides, so there's no such thing as truth, or they're not reliable because they're both biased. So why will I believe? In fact, what we want to emphasize is both sidesism does not mean fairness. Okay, both sides are not always equally valid. Even our textbooks, our Araling Panlipunan curriculum emphasizes that certain values are not negotiable. In other words, they are always valued. Human dignity, human life, yung mga karapatan, yung mga kalayaan natin bilang individual at bilang sambayanan. These are values that you cannot weigh against others and say, oh, nagtayo ng maraming building, pero pumatay ng tao, nagmassacre. Marami naman building ang tinayo. Are both equivalent to each other. So here are examples in textbooks where writers hedge in order to appear balanced. Ito yung binanggit ko kanina. No? Sa kabila ng mga dahilang tinukoy ni Marcos for imposing martial law, ay naniniwala naman ng ilang historiador at nagsusuri sa mga pangyayaring pampolitika na ang pagdeklara ng batas militar ay paraan ni Marcos upang manatili siya sa kanyang posisyon bilang Pangulo. Ayaw angkinin ng textbook writer itong pananaw. So ang sinasabi niya, ito ay pananaw ng ilang historiador. Hindi niya binabanggit kung sino ang mga historiador na ito. Another textbook states it similarly. Ayon sa masusing mga pagsusuri ng mga historiador at eksperto, idineklara ni Marcos ang batas militar dahil gusto niyang manatili. Another example, itinuturing ang panahong itong bilang pinakamadilim na bahagi. Sinasabing namatay. Sinasabing. So, sino? Kasi pag sabihin mong sinasabing namatay, pwede din magsabi sa ng iba na sinasabing hindi namatay. So, ano mangyayari sa textbook? Naging usap-usapan din yung kayamanan ng pamilya. No? Lumaganap ang kantiwalian sa pamahalaan at pinaniniwalaan kahit na maraming ebidensya nito. I think what worries us as historians and educators is that martial law also tends to be treated in the textbooks as a matter of opinion. Mahilig ang mga textbooks na magbigay nitong exercise or activity at the end of the chapter. Aatasan ng mga estudyante, mag-survey kayo ng ilang individual, minsan 3, 5, 10, bahala yung textbook writer. Walang gabay na binibigay. Basta itanong kung sang-ayon o hindi ang informant. Hindi tinatanong kung bakit. So, walang analysis ng mga dahilan. So, pagdating ng resulta, head count. Nag-interview po ako ng 10, 6 pabor, 4 hindi. Very good. That's it. But ano yung dahilan kung bakit? Paano natin evaluate yung opinion ng sang-ayon o hindi sang-ayon? Yun ay hindi tinuturo or hindi sinasani ang mga estudyante. In fact, kung titingnan natin yung evaluation tools sa textbook, they consider only the form, not the substance. What do I mean by form? Kumpleto ba yung impormasyon? In other words, kung 10 ang dapat nilang interviewin, 10 ba ang nireport nila? Angkop ba sa topic? Tama ba yung grammar? Pero yung substance, yung kalidad ng content, yung ebidensyang pinapakita upang patunayan yung mga opinion or pananaw na in-express, hindi hinihingi, hindi tinatanong ng teacher. Well, we found at least one textbook na nagtanong, why? But ang dami-daming activities na hindi ganon. For example, so they don't look for substance. For example, sa isang textbook, sa pagbuo ng konklusyon, gumawa ng simpleng survey tungkol sa batas militar, hinga ng kaisipan at saloobin ng 10 tao, hatiin ng 10 sa iba't ibang edad, ilagay sa matrix. That's it. That's it. No analysis. Another one, ito naman magsagawa ng survey, 10 to 15 tao na nakaranas ng buhay. Tanungin ulit kung sino sa kanila, it's another textbook, ang sang-ayon at hindi sang-ayon. Dito at least tinatanong ko ano ang dahilan. But, if you look at the evaluation tool, walang analysis ng dahilan. Walang evaluation ng mga claims. Another example, pagsasagawa ng panayam, gumawa ng isang panayam gamit ng anumang multimedia device tulad ng camcorder o cellphone camera. Pagkatapos ng panayam, ipahayag ang saloobin. Now look at the information tool. It only considers the following. If the information is complete from if it is appropriate, if it is taken from the required number of informants. No analysis of the opinions expressed. Another example, sumulat ng isang sanaysay, hindi lalampas sa 250 words tungkol sa naging epekto. Okay? And then, look at their results, their tools. Angkop ang paksa, maayos at organisado ang paglalahad, maayos ang pagkakasulat, at tama ang grammar. But what about the substance? Ano yung sinasabi sa sanaysay? No points. The same with this other example, paglalahad ng opinion. They don't ask you to provide the evidence to substantiate your opinion. Sumulat ng sanaysay tungkol sa naging sitwasyon, lagyan ito ng angkop na pamagat at tingnan natin yung evaluation rubric. Pagdating sa nilalaman, it just says pagkakabuo ng kaisipan at angkop, not the quality. Ano yung ebidensya, ano yung basis ng claims na hinaharap, binibigay ng bata, wala. Pamagat kung akma, estilo ng pagsulat, wasto ang ginamit na salita, buo ang mga pangungusap. So, you can pass all of these exercises without ever learning to analyze the quality of the content. What is the end result of this type of treatment of martial law? All opinions are treated as equal in weight and substance. Ang diferensya lang kung paano mo sinulat, kung buo, tama ang salita, tama ang grammar, angkop ba yung pamagat, and so on. Pero yung nilalaman, hindi binibigyan ng kabuluhan. So ang problema dyan, pag all opinions are treated as equal, when students now read social media, they don't know how to evaluate which opinion is credible and which is not. Dahil hindi sila tinuturuan sa classroom. At alam naman natin ito, not all opinions are equal. Okay? Alam naman natin, merong mga opinion na hindi talaga dapat pansinin. Kasi walang saysay, walang ebidensya, walang kabuluhan, walang logic. Bakit ko papansinin? At meron ding mga opinion na may sinasabi. Dahil may pinapakitang ebidensya, no, pinatutunayan niya yung kanyang point. Logical naman ang kanyang mga arguments. So, oo nga, no, may point siya. Yun ang dapat nating ituro sa mga estudyante. Ngunit sa pamamagitan ng mga ganitong exercise, hindi tinuturo. So, ang nagiging resulta, martial law is just a matter of opinion. That's not so. There are facts. There are facts that can be the basis of interpretations and conclusions about martial law. So ano yung danger sa pagtrato ng kasaysayan ng batas militar bilang opinion? Well, unang-una, kahit na interpretasyon yan ng textbook writer, ang dating sa teacher at sa estudyante, hindi naman yan interpretation. Textbook yan, therefore fact. So yun ang tinatanong si estudyante as a fact to memorize or true or false, tama o mali, or enumerate, fill in the blanks. Ganun pa rin ang mga exercises. At nung ini-review namin yung pedagogy, yung pagtuturo sa classroom, we looked at 6 private schools. Ganun pa rin ang mga test sa araling panlipunan. So, i-memorize lang. Ang assumption is that it is a fact kahit na interpretasyon yon ng textbook writer. Hindi ini-establish yung facts and hindi tinuturuan ng mga estudyante kung paanong mangalap ng ebidensya, paanong i-evaluate o sukatin ito, paano mag-evaluate ng mga opinions or perspectives, how do you infer from the evidence, how do you arrive at your own conclusions. As I said at the outset, lahat ng mga kakayahang ito ay nakatala sa curriculum ng DepEd sa araling panlipunan. Ngunit hindi ito tinuturo sa classroom. So, if martial law is treated as mere opinion, then it is not surprising that maraming mga mito ang kumakalat tungkol sa batas militar. At I'll just give focus on 2 myths. Yung una was magaling ang ekonomiya nung martial law, golden era. And the second, kung meron mang human rights violations, kakaunti lang. You know, ang metaphor na gustong-gusto nila ginagamit nila nung panahon ng batas militar, smiling martial law. Okay? So let's look at these myths. Yung una, golden era. Makikita natin sa isang Facebook post, walang Pilipinong naghirap nung panahon ng batas militar. But in fact, if you look at the data, by the end of martial law, 6 out of 10 families were poor. You're looking, starting off, if referring to the upper right graph, starting in 1965, let's say about 40% of the families were poor. By 1985, a year before Mr. Marcos stepped down, nearly 60% of the families were poor. And you will see in the different provinces, the range varies. For example, Southern Tagalog from a little more than 30% to about 55%. In Metro Manila, from about 20% to about 42%, and so on. But you can see the trend. Farmers became poorer in the Marcos era. This is a table that shows the value of real wages. Real wages means taking into consideration inflation rate. Nominal wages, yung actual na halaga na natanggap mo. And alam naman natin, kung nakatanggap ka ng 10 piso noong 1962, by 1986, yung 10 piso na yon ay hindi na nakakabili ng 10 piso na bibili mo in 1962. So we're talking about real wages of Filipinos working in agriculture, which fell by 30%. The real wage, let's say, was 42 pesos at the start of 1960s. And by the time martial law had come to an end, it had dropped by 30%. By the last decade of martial law, yung presyo ng mga bilihin nag-triple. What cost 100 pesos in 1978 cost 350 pesos in 1986. That's using a CPI, Consumer Price Index of 1978. It's our base year, so 100 ang base year. And you will see that the prices tripled. Ang external debt natin increased by 77 times in nominal terms, and 24 times in real terms from 1961 up to 1986, as the table here shows. May nagsasabi din, bahagi nitong mito na ito, na kaya, and Mr. Marcos din, sinabi niya kaya daw siya nagpatong ng batas militar, tatanggalin niya ang oligarkiya. Well, ni-replace niya, let's put it that way. Nagkaroon siya ng mga bagong tinatawag nating cronies. These are friends or relatives who were able to gain special privileges in business owing to their closeness or proximity to Mr. Marcos or his wife. And these people became the new oligarchs. You have the example of Roberto Benedicto, kaklase ni Marcos sa UP College of Law. Siya yung tumulong sa magbubukas ng mga accounts sa Switzerland at marami siyang nakuha in exchange for that. Naging pinuno siya ng Philippine National Bank, nagamit niya yung pondo doon para sa kanyang mga business, and he got monopolies in sugar and media. 1990, sinoli niya ang $60 million from Swiss bank deposits, shares of 32 companies, cash dividends, etc. So Roberto Benedicto is known for sugar and media monopoly. Antonio Florendo, huge banana plantation, gumamit siya ng prisoners, grabe, as farm laborers. He's known Banana King. Danding Coangco, coconut levy, okay? But according to the Los Angeles Times, quote, second only to Marcos in the systematic looting of the Philippines. Si Rodolfo Cuenca, Construction Development Corporation of the Philippines, kanya yan ang nakatanggap ng malalaking government projects katulad ng Manila North and South Expressway. So siya ay nasa construction. Yung ill-gotten wealth ng mga Marcos, can you imagine, he opened his first account in Switzerland in 1968. Okay? just 3 years into his presidency. First term, kasi una siyang nahalal, 1965. So 3 taon lang siya nanunungkulang bilang Pangulo. At nagbukas na siya ng account under the name William Saunders, pseudonym for Ferdinand, and Jane Ryan, pseudonym for Imelda. At tong mga dokumentong ito ay natuklasan sa Palasyo ng Malacanang nung nagsitakbo ang mga Marcos sa Hawaii noong 1986, na iwan nila itong papeles na ito. Ang initial deposit nila noong 1968 ay $950,000 US. 3 taon pa lang siya presidente. Dito sa report ng New York Times noong 1986, sa suitcase mismo ni Ginoong Marcos na dinala nila sa Hawaii, one document lists $88.7 million in 5 banks found in the US, Switzerland, and Cayman Islands in the Caribbean. Merong nakasulat, sulat kamay, na papel indicating $35 million more had been deposited pero hindi pa pumapasok, hindi pa credited sa account. Merong stock certificates from various Philippine corporations made out to various names, total par value of 1.9 million. Nung tumakbo sila sa Hawaii, syempre sa port of entry, ano yung customs service inventaryo, articles accompanying Marcos party upon arrival in Honolulu, 22 cardboard boxes of cash containing 27.8 million pesos. At that time, the value was $1.1 million. Ito yung breakdown. 13 boxes had 22.28 million in 100 peso bills. Wala pang 500 at 1,000 pesos noon. So can you imagine, katakot-takot na bilang ng kahon ito. And at that time, even now, bawal maglabas ng piso na lalabis sa halagang, hindi ko na alam ang halaga ngayon, 50,000 pesos. Then, hindi ko alam, basta may limit sa bilang ng pesos na maaring ilabas sa bansa. At yan ang nilabas nila. 4 boxes, 3.6 million in 50 peso bills. 2 boxes, 720,000 in 20 peso bills. One had 1,004,000 in various bills, kasamang 5 peso notes. Noon wala pang coin na 5 peso, note pa yon. And then 1 box had 103,500 in Christmas packs. Left over pa mula pa nung December 1985. And one had 181,000 plus in 100s, 20s, and 10 peso notes. Bukod sa 22 cardboard boxes, may 8 certificates of time deposit showing placements of 46 million pesos. May isang large wooden crate with an infant Jesus of Prague, may gold necklaces. Yung isang necklace may diamond, yung isa may gold cross, another gold medallion. Isang brown suitcase, 82 items, 7 ladies. Basta watches, Rolex, ano ba yan? Mga rubies. Then from another alligator bag na may black cover, may sapphires, rubies, and diamonds, set into bracelet, earrings valued at $1.487 million and so on. 777 suitcases with 93 strands of pearls. It's just unimaginable. It just defies imagination. When you see it written down and then you try to visualize it, ang hirap talagang imagine that one family could have all of these. Anyway, let's move on to the second myth. Nakakaunti lamang ang mga paglabag sa karapatang pantao noong panahon ng batas militar. Pinagmamalaki na iisa lang ang na-execute at yun daw ay yung alleged drug lord na si Lim Seng. You will see the photograph on the right. He was executed sa isang lote sa likod ng libingan ng mga bayani noong January 15, 1973. Kukonti lang daw ang inaresto. Karamihan ng mga inaresto ay komunista at wala daw mga masaker noong panahon ng batas militar. Pansinin natin yung bersyon ng anak, si Marcos Jr. Ito yung sinabi niya on human rights abuses. Meron daw some minor incidents such as a drunken soldier beating someone up. might have occurred, quote, but it was not part and parcel of government. It was not national policy to commit human rights abuses, sabi ng anak. Pushed further on issues such as detention of journalists, newspapers being closed, etc. Marcos said such measures were needed to contain, quote, wars against Muslim and communist rebels, quote, so the war rules applied, I suppose. Yun ang kanyang justification. Marcos Jr.'s version. Okay? Siyempre, may version din si si Enrile. Very few were arrested, tapos na-release, sabi niya. They were inconvenienced for a while. You know, yung sinasabing very few inconvenienced a while, relative yan eh. Sa kanya, thousands and thousands few. Okay, why do we say that? 107,240 primary victims, 70,000 arrested, most without warrant, 34,000 tortured from Amnesty International. Few yan. At ang tawag dyan, inconvenienced for a while. Tapos sabi niya, name me one person arrested because of political or religious belief. Name me one. Sabi niya, none. Of course, that's a lie. I can cite my own father. We never knew what he was arrested for because he was never charged. During martial law, wala daw massacre. But if you look at the data, these were some of the massacres that occurred at that time. Sa Sultan Kudarat noong September 1974, the Malisbong massacre, 1,500. Can you imagine killed inside a house of prayer? Inside. Okay? Aside from the 1,500 killed, 3,000 were arrested, and then some 300 houses were burned. Yung Bicol village massacre sa Mindanao, a paramilitary group entered the village. It raided, burned, and killed 42 Muslim villagers. Okay? 7 uniformed armed men entered the village that night in Bicol in November 1977. They ordered 12 families out of their houses. They made them squat on the ground, and then they opened fire, killed everyone except 1 adult and 3 children who got wounded and managed to run to the bushes behind. So, hindi sila napansin. A total of 42 were killed. Daet massacre sa Camarines Norte, nagmamarcha, 4,000 marchers. They were shot at, 4 were killed. Daming nasaktan. Sagod massacre sa Northern Samar, 45 killed. Escalante massacre, 20 were killed. Archimedes Trajano, 21-year-old student sa Mapapua Institute of Technology. May isang forum sa pamantasan ng lungsod ng Maynila. And he asked then Amy Marcos, who was then the leader of Kabataang Barangay, ano ang mga qualities or credentials niya to lead, to hold the government position and lead the Kabataang Barangay. He also asked her about human rights violations committed at that time. And the eyewitnesses saw Amy's security men pull Archimedes out of the open forum. His body was found in a street in Manila on September 2, 1977. A law was passed, Republic Act 10368, passed in 2013, admitting that violations were indeed committed during martial law, and that victims were entitled to compensation. This is the record presented by the Human Rights Victims Claims Board. It is grossly understated because not everybody claimed. I know families who did not. My family did not make any claim, and I know others who did not make a claim for compensation. But you will find here there are people. This is proof, evidence of violations. And of course, the best account would be a narrative. Please, I hope you can hear the sound. Can you hear the sound? Can you hear the sound? I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Can you hear the sound? Hindi. Okay, let me play it now and try. Can you hear it now?
Ang mga biktima kasi sa pamilya, si mama.
Can you hear it? Okay. I'll continue.
Si Papang, yung panganay namin, si Enrique, si Francisco Jr., and then si Ate Laila, tapos si Manong Romulo, tapos si Armando, and then ako, and then bunso namin. Ito. Yan, ako yan. Yan, ito? Ikaw yan? Oo. Ano to? First year high school ako. Pinaupo ako sa ice block, tapos nilublog pa ako sa kasillas. Malis lahat ng damit ko. Sinukuri-oriente ako. Tapos mawawala naman ng manay, tapos mamaya na naman, uulitin na naman. Pag naalala ko yun talagang talagang this used to be the La Union Constabulary Command. Dinala ako dito sa building na yan, merong officer's quarter, doon ako na-torture. Renade na rin yung bahay namin sa San Fernando. Kinuha si Mamang, si Papang, si Kuya ko Francisco. Yung tatlo sila. Kasi they were looking for Romulo and Armando. Actually, as early as December 1974, we already heard na namatay na sila. Yung dalawang kapatid ko, si Romulo and Armando. My sister, sila yung nag-retrieve yung body niya sa Hungduan na Fugao. Sa bugtong unang ulo niya. Ang balita namin, sa rifle butt. Noong araw ng libing, merong nag-abot sa ate ko na sulat galing kay Armando. Tapos yung nagbigay sinabi na rin na namatay na rin siya together with other 4 unknown na kasama niya. So parang double whammy sa amin para sa akin nililibing mo yung isang kapatid mo tapos here comes another news na yung isa rin wala na rin. So kung hindi ka magpro-protesta, you keep silent, you just accept tyranny, you just accept powerlessness, you just accept plundering. Despite yung nangyari sa pamilya at sa mga kakilala ko, mga kaibigan ko na naging biktima, given the chance, I would do it all over again.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? So let's now move on to some practical things about how to deal with these claims. So the first advice I would give is be conscious of false claims. Tingnan natin yung nakapost dito sa isang Facebook post, nagpapakita ng bridge na yan, boundary daw ng Ilocos Norte and Cagayan. The truth is that that is a bridge in Australia, in Wollongong, Australia, taken by an Australian photographer, D. Kramer. So it was superimposed here and then posted as one of the achievements of Mr. Marcos. This was shared about 24,000 times of Facebook accounts. About 446,700 plus followers of Marcos family and of Duterte read and probably shared that post. Okay. Look at the evidence. In 2019, in an interview, February 27, 2019, sinabi ni Pangulong Duterte, wala daw katibayan that the Marcoses assessed ill-gotten wealth. Accusations remain unproven. And yet, these are decisions that were made by the court, Supreme Court in the Sandigan Bayan from 2003 Supreme Court decision, another Supreme Court decision 2012, another Supreme Court decision 2017, and the Sandigan Bayan conviction of Mrs. Marcos in 2018. These were all before the interview published in February 2019. And yet sinabing walang ebidensya. If you look at the Supreme Court decision of 15 July 2003, the Supreme Court ruled that the accounts, the Swiss accounts with amounting to $658.2 million were ill-gotten wealth. The court was also mentioned that for 12 years, the Marcos family tried to stave off the case. Kesyo hindi nila alam yung deposito, kesyo hindi nila maalala kasi ang tagal-tagal noon, kesyo legal naman ang pag-acquire nila ng perang ito. And each time that, that dragged and the case went on and on for 12 years. And yet they had the gall to complain na wala silang hearing. This matrix was prepared by UP law professor Virginia Viray, and it shows you the ill-gotten wealth recovered from just 3 Supreme Court decisions. Okay, just 3. From the Swiss bank deposits, the Arelma accounts, the jewelry that was taken, and paintings. Itong paintings, may mga works ng masters, classics, etc. You will find that all. Now, the total amounts in peso and dollars are both conservative because if you look at the Swiss account deposits, the value there is as of 2002 and we're already 2021. So these values are medyo outdated na. If you look at the jewelry, $5 million, that was the value in 1991. But now it must be, I don't know, much, much more than that. So the Sandigan Bayan decision in 2018 found Mrs. Marcos guilty of 7 out of 11 cases. Case numbers 17287, 288, 289, 890, 867, 868, and 869. Whereby she's sentenced in each to suffer the penalty of minimum 6 years to 1 month to 11 years maximum, with perpetual disqualification to hold public office per guilty case. You will see on the right the annex of a sample of a foundation that was established by the Marcoses in order to launder their money. Doon nila tinatago sa pangalan ng foundation na may iba-ibang pangalan. The court also found that from these foundations, the Marcoses earned about 10.6 billion pesos, and the Sandigan Bayan explicitly named Amy Marcos and Marcos Jr. as direct beneficiaries of this amount. Of course, the third thing is examine the credibility of the speaker or author. We want to look as an example at then Defense Secretary of Martial Law, Enrile. On 22 of September 1972, he was supposedly ambushed. There is a photograph of the ambush. Marcos noted this in his diary of September 22, 9:50 p.m. Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile was ambushed near Wakwak at about 8 p.m. tonight. It was a good thing he was riding in his security car as a protective measure. His first car, which he was riding, was the one riddled by bullets from a car parked in ambush. If you scroll down a few paragraphs later, this makes the martial law proclamation a necessity. So fast forward to 22 February 1986. All right, 14 years later, press conference ni Enrile sa Ministry of National Defense sa EDSA. He retracted this story of September 22, 1972, and admitted that he and Marcos used it to justify the imposition of martial law. This was carried in some foreign newspapers. Now, jump more recently, 2012, in his memoir, Enrile retracted his retraction of February 22, 1986. Bumalik siya sa kanyang original na kwento noong September 1972 na talagang nangyari daw yung ambush. So, you know, for us historians, when you have a source who changes his mind like this, then he is not a reliable source. Okay, he is not a source that we can trust. In history, we look for consistency. Pag consistently pabago-bago ang isip, then hindi mo siya consistency in a good way, consistently truthful. Pero kung pabago-bago din, hindi siya reliable na source. Another example, here are I got this from the Facebook post of Gideon Lasco, where he looks at the political orientations of Enrile since 1972. Lahat na ata ng leader ay kanyang sinuportahan. Of course, his longest serving, at present, he went back to his original, which was Marcos, and now to this day, he is back to that. Another example of examining the witness is looking at the Marcos Jr. Kalat na kalat sa YouTube itong Italiano gold, that Marcos gold can save the world. I got that clip from YouTube. I call it Marcos gold. Now you see it. Noong April 9, 1990, Marcos Jr. was interviewed by Christina Luz in New York. At that time, doon pa sila sa US, and that was the time of the hearing in New York. So Luz asks Marcos Jr., quote, all this business about gold and shiploads of it, how come you're talking about it more openly now? Ang sagot ni Jr., only I know where it is and how to get it. And that was published in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. And then, years later, on June 13, 2007, in a civil case number 0093, Junior filed a complaint in intervention before the Sandigan Bayan. This has to do with the property of the Ortigases that were forcibly, well, they say were forcibly sold to Mr. Marcos, and the title were surrendered to the government after EDSA by the Marcos crony who got the title from Mr. Marcos. And the Ortigases filed a claim before the court saying that that was theirs in 2007. Marcos Jr. filed a claim in 2007, also claiming that hindi yan sa Ortigas, amin talaga yan. Quote, income from legitimately owned property includes income from trading of precious metals from the years 1946 to 54. And Mr. Marcos Jr. Attached the deposition of Constante Rubio, a close associate of his father. And in that deposition, Mr. Rubio said that FM Marcos took me into his confidence and asked me to assist him in his business of trading metals, more specifically gold. So here is an admission. Marcos Gold, now you see it, as the son said, only I know where it is and how to get it. Take note, 1990, and in a civil case deposition in 2007. Gold. Now comes election year, January 24. Before you see the gold, now you don't. He was interviewed by One News, and Marcos Jr. was stated in response, quote, sa buong buhay ko, hindi pa ako nakakakita ng gold na ganyan. Alam mo, marami kong kakilala kung saan-saan nagbuhukay, pero ako, wala pa kahit anong nakakitang gold. And then more recently, on February 5, 2022, the interview by DZBB of presidential candidates, he was asked about the gold. 4 words lamang ang sagot ni Junior, quote, walang ginto. Walang ginto. So if you look at his history, decades ago, siya lang ang nakakaalam kung saan ang ginto, siya lang ang nakakaalam kung paano ito makukuha. And then, fast forward to election period, walang ginto. Wala daw siyang nakikita, wala siyang alam. Another one would be the record of Masagana 99. This is quite interesting because the hearing was not about Masagana 99, but about the response of the government to the pandemic. And the Senate hearing was on May 20, 2020. The chairman of the committee, I think she was the chairman, or anyway, she was the one who posed the question, was Senator Amy Marcos. And she said, quote, during Masagana 99 in the 70s, there was very effective use of commercial banks, rural banks, cooperative banks. I believe that scheme would truly work. However, perhaps we could consider enlarging the national government's stake even in that regard. And the current Secretary of Defense, Secretary Dominguez, replied, and I quote, ma'am, before we go ahead, regarding the Masagana 99, I was Secretary of Agriculture that cleaned up the mess. These were his exact words. The mess of Masagana 99 that was left by Masagana 99. There were about 800 rural banks that were bankrupted by that program. We had to rescue them. So whether it was a total success or not, it has to be measured against that. Sagot ni Marcos, the successful blank perhaps was not in banking, it was certainly in rice exportation. Sinagot siya ni Dominguez, oh no, we never exported rice. We never exported rice, ma'am. So again, in history, when you look at sources and you have two conflicting informants, you look at which of the two is the primary witness, meaning actually participated or knew what was going on, had direct evidence or had a direct hand in it, and who has the expertise. So in this case, Secretary Dominguez was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time. So siya talagang nakakaalam. In his own words, siya ang naglinis. We cleaned up the mess. So he would be the more credible informant. My fourth advice is pay attention to the words that are used. Here are two markers about the same person, Ferdinand E. Marcos. On the left is the official marker produced by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Hindi na po ako ang chairman yan. This was installed in Batac, Ilocos Norte on September 11, 2017. The other was uploaded on the same day, but by a student group called Baybayin sa Ateneo. And they posted it in the Facebook post. Now, these two markers refer to the same individual, Ferdinand E. Marcos, born 1917, died 1989. But pay attention to the words they use to describe him. What words do they have in common? Okay, Pangulo, correct, Pangulo. Ginamit din batas militar, yes, batas militar. Bagong lipunan, nandito rin ang bagong lipunan. So, you have similarities. However, where do they differ? Well, the student marker uses the term dictador, and to demonstrate that claim refers to the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus in 1971, natalo sa snap elections, ngunit inangkin pa rin ang pagkapangulo in 1986, at yung record niya during martial law, 3,275 pinatay, 35,000 tinorture, 1,600 nawala, at nagnakaw ng 10 bilyong dolyar. There's another interesting play with words. The official marker talks about people power revolution, which the student marker describes as pinabagsak ng nagkaisang sambayanan. And the official marker talks about namalagi sa Hawaii ang pamilya. The student marker says tumakas. Ibang-iba, namalagi versus tumakas. And the student marker adds, patagong inilibing bilang bayani noong 2016. So pay attention to the words used, talking about the same person, presenting similar facts, but evidently some facts appear in one marker, they do not appear in the other, and the words used also represent a point of view. Finally, be aware of deceptive arguments. Madalas ko nadidinig ito, do not pass on to the son the sins of the father. Marcos Jr. was only 15 when his father imposed martial law. Now, may I just call your attention, itong sins of the father, ang umaamin yan, yung mga supporters ni Marcos Jr., hindi yung anak. You will never, I have not yet heard the son admit to the sins of his father. Pero inaamin ng mga supporters, which I think is evidence that all the exposition about the things that were done by Marcoses during martial law is beginning to hurt them, because now the supporters are having to find other arguments to counter the facts that we present about the record of Marcos Sr. and his wife during martial law. As I said, this is an argument made by their supporters. You never hear this from the son. So to answer this argument, you can point out that Marcos Jr. and his mother tried to block the transfer of the Marcos Arelma account to the Philippine government. And there's testimony of this both in Supreme Court records and in the PCGG. There's evidence of that. So, second, Amy and Marcos Jr. benefited from ill-gotten wealth hidden in Swiss foundations, and the proof of that is the Sandigan Bayan decision of 2018. Three, Jr. is the executor of the estate of his father, and he has refused to pay the inheritance tax, assessed at 23.29 billion in 1991, ruled as final by the Court of Appeals in 1994, upheld by the Supreme Court in 1999, and amount due today, including penalties, is 203.81 billion. He has refused to pay it. To have an idea of what this amount means, 203.8 billion pesos. I have listed here the top 10 agencies with the highest budgets, and you will see that Marcos tax is what? Certainly more than 4 times the budget of the entire judiciary of the Philippines, from the Supreme Court down to the lowest court. It is several times larger than DOLE, Department of Labor and Management, much larger than Department of Transportation budget for the whole year. This is 2022. It is almost double the budget of Department of Agriculture. It is only slightly smaller than the entire budget of the Department of Social Work and Development, smaller a little bit than the Department of National Defense. So just one amount from a single family is much greater than the entire annual budget of 4 of the top 10 agencies with the highest budget, and nearly the same as that of DSWD. Incredible. So his parents stole, as stated by the Supreme Court, ill-gotten wealth, but Junior continues to benefit, and directly from the ill-gotten wealth. He has not paid the inheritance tax and penalties, even income tax. Tayong mga teacher, yan ay kinakaltas automatically sa sweldo natin, ngunit nung siya ay vice-gobernador at gobernador ng Ilocos Norte, hindi siya nagbayad ng kanyang income tax. In fact, Marcos Jr. has known for decades the extent of his father's wealth. Doon sa kaso sa Sandigan Bayan civil case, Republic of the Philippines versus Lucio Tan in August 2007, nag-testify siya doon. He was called to testify. Ano yung sinabi niya in 2007? Quote, I was summoned by my father to his office, and he was there with Mr. Lucio Tan in the discussion, and he told me that he would like me to familiarize myself with the operations of some of the enterprises we have interests in. It was part of a larger effort to really clarify and conduct an inventory and legal audit of all those business interests that we have. My sister Amy was given the job of conducting the legal audit, and I was given the job to go to as many of these enterprises as I could. And as I said, learn the operations and meet the people who are running them so that when the time comes that we would take over, we would know how to manage these different interests. So you don't want to pass on the sins of the father to the son. The son is fully aware, even when his father was alive, because he said he was called by his father to his office. So the son has always been aware of these enterprises, so-called. Now, some people have said they should apologize, but the daughter says yung admission of guilt, unang-una, ang liit-liit ko noon, paano ko i-admit? Hindi ko naman alam, which is absolutely crazy. She was head of the Kabatang Barangay, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, that's a non-sequitur. It's a false argument. And then the son, the junior, he says, there, I will put it higher. Bongbong also insists his family has nothing to apologize for in regard to his father and namesake's 20-year rule. Okay, my father doesn't need me to vindicate him. But I want to share with you, to close my presentation, examples of other families who found out that their ancestors had committed wrongdoing during the Holocaust in Europe. Here is an example of the family of Roald Dahl, who was a famous short story writer, and some of his short stories, children's writer, I'm sorry, not shorts, children's writer, children's books writer, and some of them even became movies. And the family discovered that the father had made pala anti-Semitic remarks. So this is what the family posted. The Dahl family and the Roald Dahl Story Company deeply apologized for the lasting and understandable hurt caused by Roald Dahl's anti-Semitic statements. Those prejudiced remarks are incomprehensible to us. Okay, they stand in marked contrast to the man we knew and to the values at the heart of his stories, which have positively impacted, and yet they apologized. Okay, that's one example. Another example is the case of Thomas Edelman. His Nazi grandfather took over a Jewish man's store. So he tracked down the descendants of this Jewish man's store owner. And he found her, Hannah Ehrenreich. She's an 83, in 2019, she was an 83-year-old retired teacher living in Israel. So he traced her because he wanted to apologize for the actions of the grandfather he had never met. Because he grew up, his parents were estranged, so hindi niya nakilala. But still, nung bata siya, marami siyang nadidinig na rumors tungkol sa family business. It was once owned by Benjamin Heidelberger na napilitan to sell it to his grandfather, Wilhelm, because Heidelberger was a Jew. So what did Edelman say? He has a son. I want him, my 15-year-old son, to understand what history is, what history means, although he doesn't have anything to do with this story. So malinaw, nobody's blaming the son for the sins of the grandfather, great-grandfather, okay? Although he doesn't have anything to do with this, it's our ancestor who has impacted the lives of a whole family who had a life in this country. I want to make sure that at least my family will never again be responsible for injustice experienced by others, but stand up to take part for the weak. So very powerful statement. Some families also make restitution. When they were alive, Albert Ryman Sr. and Jr., they own Krispy Kreme donuts, Panera Bread, and many other well-known businesses. They never talked about the Nazi era, and then they passed away. And the family never realized the extent of their ancestors' links with the Nazis until they read the documents. So the younger generation kept asking questions. So the family commissioned a historian from the University of Munich to examine the family records in 2014. They gave him all the documents. Look at it and you just come back and tell us what you find. And in 2019, the historian said that the father and son, Albert Reimann Sr. and Jr., supported Hitler and donated to the SS, that is the Schutzstaffel, the paramilitary organization of the Nazi Party. So very strong and very deep links. The family, when they found out, this is how their spokesman described them, quote, "We were all ashamed and turned white as the wall when they discovered the background of their father and grandfather. There is nothing to gloss over. These crimes are disgusting. The whole truth must be put on the table." Okay? And the family also donated $11 million to charity as restitution. So oftentimes we hear these words, restitution, and in our language, in Filipino, we have two words for reparation. One is bayad pinsala, and the other is pagbabayad puri. And I prefer to, before we get to that, this is my last slide before that, sorry. My last comment on restitution is access to the truth. And here I want to use the example of Pope Francis now. In history, there have long been doubts expressed about the record of Pope Pius XII during World War II because he was very silent about the genocide during the Holocaust. And historically, people have been a little bit critical of his position, why he was very quiet. He didn't use his position of the papacy to denounce or mitigate or whatever help. Now, by tradition, papal documents cannot be opened until 70 years after the end of the Pope's term, which would be 2028 in the case of Pius. But in 2019, Pope Francis announced that his archives, Pius's archives, would be open because, and I love this phrase, quote, "The church is not afraid of history. Rather, she loves it and would like to love it more and better, as God does." So you see, the church does not fear history. If you fear history, maybe you have something to hide. But as Pope Francis put it, he opened the archives and bahala na ang mga researchers and historians what they find. But those archives are now open. So the examples I gave you, access to truth, restoration, apology, these are all means of reparation. And as I was saying earlier, in our language, we have two words for reparation. One is bayad pinsala and the other is pagbabayad puri. And I prefer the term pagbabayad puri. Why? Let's go back to a little bit of history. This is the historian in me. When Apolinario Mabini wrote in 1899, quote, "We desire independence not as an end, but as a means, without which we can achieve nothing. But independence alone is not enough. A moral government rather, is also indispensable. But it must be very moral. That is, it governs with truth and without deceit, sincerely complying with the laws and its promises to the people." Now, interestingly, how did Mabini call or describe the revolution? He called it pagbabangong puri. And how did Mabini describe the government? He called it tagapagbangong puri. So when you talk about pagbabayad puri, you are talking about something that is moral and truthful and as well accountable. So I want to end there and thank you all for your patience in listening to my lecture. Thank you very much, Sister Aileen. I give it back to you. Thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Diokno. We will have a 2-minute break.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Yeah. TJ, na
Welcome back. Napakahusay po ninyo, Professor Diokno. Welcome to the question and answer portion of this webinar. Before we proceed, may I just read some comments from our attendees from Facebook and YouTube. At around 10 a.m., we got 273 viewers in Facebook from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And we thank Darl Ben Dumpet for the 50 stars sent. Okay, so these are some comments. I would like to start reading them. From Loretta Castro, napakahusay na analysis ng mga textbooks ukol sa mga kakulangan ng ebidensya sa martial law story. Gayong meron namang mga facts na galing sa Supreme Court. From Father Toots Buenafe, our CEAP Chief Champion for Subcommittee on Media Education, he said, thank you po, Prof. Maria Serena Diokno. Sana maraming AP teachers, social sciences teachers at coordinators, principals and deans, administrators na andito ngayon. Sana nga, sana all. From James Pasamonte, I love your presentation, Prof. Diokno. Very logical and good arguments. I do hope and pray that more academic professionals will learn not only about martial law truths, but will learn as well that opinions should be backed with facts, evidences. And from Stutters on GD, sana po marami o lahat ng guro at mag-aaral ay nakakapanood nitong lecture ni Dr. Diokno. Mga detalye, katotohanan at katunayang kailangan nating lahat malaman at pagbasehan ng ating mga desisyon at gawain para sa bayan at kinabukasan. At kasabay po nito, Prof. Diokno, ang maraming puso, maraming mga reactions na dumarating habang nagle-lecture po kayo. Actually, ako rin po, talagang nakinig ako from simula hanggang wakas, not because I'm taking notes, pero talagang yung iba ngayon ko lang nalalaman bilang pinanganak po ako 1973. So martial law na, no? Ang nabasa kong mga textbooks ay siguro malaking pagkukulang doon sa at lumaki po akong kumakanta ng Bagong Lipunan sa elementary. So medyo nakaka-relate po ako dun sa mga taong ngayon lang nakikita itong mga evidences na ito or kulang kung ano yung napag-aralan at maaaring kulang din yung personal na pagsasaliksik dahil nga hindi ito nakitang importante. Pero nagpapasalamat tayo ngayon dahil sa ngayon sa sitwasyon natin in this May 2022 elections, kailangan natin ito. So I would like to start po our question, Prof. From Sir Alan Arellano, our Executive Director. Ito po ang question niya. If the AP authors are watching now, ma'am, what primary sources on the martial law years do you suggest that they utilize for their textbooks? Ayun po.
Thank you, Alan. You know, the advantage now is that people have collected a large mass of information and put them in Google Drive. Hinahanap ko yun kasi somebody asked me, I'll send it to Sister Aileen. May isang Google Drive that has a lot of documents and you can choose what you want. Ang dami. Pero sa akin, basic, of course, you don't have to read the entire Supreme Court decision, but you can, go through it and then select excerpts that primarily the decision of the court in the case. Pero ang daming primary sources. Ang dami ring documentaries, maraming interviews. So actually, ang problema is not a shortage. Ang problema is marami. Kaya lang noon kasi hindi siguro, how do I say it? Ang mga textbook writers kasi, I think, I don't know if it was self-censorship or fear in stating what happened, no, or maybe concerned that they might appear biased against or for. No, I think that should be the least of our concerns. The concern should be what do the facts say and then present them.
So malaki po talagang challenge para sa aming nasa education o nasa academia. That really we open our eyes now to all these sources available. In fact, thank you Ted Santos and Father Toots. Nagbigay din po sila ng mga examples na sources available online and offline as well. And then the second question po from Ted Santos. Ito, ang ganda po nung palitan nila ng mga messages dito sa chat box. Sabi ni Ted Santos po, If Enrile's ambush on September 22 was a cause for declaring martial law, why was Proclamation 1081 dated the day before?
Yeah. Actually, it was dated the day before, but was only made public on September 23. So I think that Mr. Marcos had signed it early, but was waiting for the time to execute, to implement. Like my father was arrested on the 23rd. One of the first, he and Senator Nino were arrested on the 23rd. No? So actually pa lang, 21 pa pinirmahan. But na-execute siya on the 23rd. Now, when you cite the ambush of Enrile as a reason, it was one reason to justify, but not the only reason. Maraming binigay na dahilan si Marcos, no? Kesyo, banta ng komunista, problema sa secessionist sa Mindanao, etc., etc., etc. So naging karagdagang justification pa ito. Dramatic, kasi somebody attempting to take the life of one of his cabinet ministers. No? So dramatic, yan. The day after that, yon, he made it public. Yeah.
In fact, Prof, may nagsagot din po dito from Ed Abad. Sabi niya, Marcos predated it to September 21, 1972. He has a penchant for numbers divisible by 7. Marcos was very superstitious, sabi niya po.
That is one theory, no? Of course, I can't prove it, but I've heard that. Yes. May
and then another long talaga po itong pinost ni Stutters on GB, and these are from various sources na nakuha niya about this. But I think your answer is enough naman to satisfy Ted Santos, I guess. And then another question here from Peter Rufino Baltasar. Ito po maganda, and question ko rin ito actually. What went wrong? Why are these facts not integrated comprehensively in the AP curriculum?
Okay. If you look at the pre-K to 12 textbooks, tiningnan din namin yun eh. Some of my colleagues sa history department sa UP, no? So tiningnan namin yung pre-K to 12 textbooks. They were worse about martial law. They were not good, ano? So here there is an improvement in that may admission that there were human rights violations. Nando naman that that Marcos had arrogated unto himself lawmaking powers, etc. But as I said, why don't they go into detail? Kasi my sense is, one, as I explained, it's a desire to appear neutral. Kaya both sides CCM. Ayaw silang ma-accuse that they are biased, they are anti-Marcos, that they are anti-this or anti-that. So ayaw nilang lumabas na ganon. So every effort is made to parang not only to present both sides, but sa akin worse, to treat this as a matter of opinion, or to not present evidence that is accepted, such as court decisions. Okay, so I think it's one that's a very strong factor, yung desire not to appear biased. Siguro there is concern na kung ganyan ang position nila, hindi papasa yung textbook. Baka sabihin, aktivistang sumulat niyan or something. So ang sinasabi nila, tungkol sa ambisyon ni Marcos o sa pagnanais ni Marcos na manatili sa kapangyarihan, kaya niya dineklara ang martial law, yan ang pananaw ng ilang mga historiador. Hindi nila aangkinin na gano'n, even if there is evidence to show that. No, there were speeches that Marcos had made and that he had formed a study committee, an internal committee to even 2 years before he declared martial law earlier to study the possibility of declaring martial law, etc., and the impact. They don't. The other thing is, and maybe this is looking at the textbooks from a broader perspective, no? Most of the elementary textbook writers, let's say sa AP, let's say grades 5 and 6, most of them are not really historians. maybe some are, but most are teachers of Araling Panlipunan who is not necessarily a historian by training. So access to primary sources or knowing where to find them, these things that historians would look at, like our concern, like when I mentioned earlier, they conflate the reasons for imposing martial law with events that led to or events that preceded martial law. These are not always the same thing, but they are loosely put together as mga dahilan kung bakit pinatong, these nuances matter to us as historians and should be explained in a simple way. Now, I think that's another reason that the training, they're not necessarily, many of them are not historians, and mahirap talagang, mahirap talagang gumawa ng textbook. Kaya ang advice ko sa CEAP, mga schools, kasi nandiyan na yung textbook, mag-develop na lang ng dagdag na learning resources. Magdagdag ng learning resources na pwedeng gamitin sa halip ng chapter na yun sa textbook or bilang karagdagang impormasyon para hindi tayo nakapako. I agree, Mary Ann is saying textbook publishers must choose their writers properly, but most of the writers they choose are not really historians.
That's why.
Yeah, so there's also money in writing textbooks kasi you sell in volume and daming bumibili niyan, pero mahirap. It's not easy. So if you're asking me why they don't want to write it that way, one is probably they don't have the training, and two is that desire to, of the fear of appearing as critical or something like that.
Inisip ko nga po kanina, Prof, nung itong question na ito, kasi the same yung iniisip ko, bakit ang tagal na nung martial law tapos ngayon kulang pa rin tayo sa mga kaalaman tungkol dito, Parang nasa kultura din kasi natin. Una ko pong puntos is, na-satisfy na ba tayo nung nagkaroon ng EDSA revolution? Kaya parang wala tayong masyadong documentation or museum. Kasi di ba, yung Holocaust, pag pumunta ka sa Jerusalem, nakakaiyak talaga pag pumasok ka. Pero pag sa atin, parang kulang po yung mga ganitong...
Aileen, tama ka. Kasi pagkukulang din natin yan eh. After EDSA, sa totoo, hindi na natin pinansin itong mga textbook. Pinabayaan natin. Siguro kasi na focus tayo sa ibang mga mas immediate na concern or mga ganon. So, pinabayaan natin. Hindi natin tinignan. Tapos, isa pang nakikita kong naging pagkukulang in terms of education policy. Ewan ko kung naging bahagi ng CEAP dyan. Nagkaroon ng super laking emphasis, science, math, and English. Na hindi ko namang sinasabing mali. Kaya lang, all of a sudden, everybody saying importante ang history. All of a sudden now, bakit hindi yan alam ng mga bata? All of a sudden, bakit ganyan mag-isip ang mga bata? Bakit hindi nila ma-detect ang fake news? Bakit ganyan-ganyan? In a way, the system and policymakers have neglected the social sciences. In this tendency to compete internationally in science, math, and English, they fail to realize that the fundamental critical competencies are also taught in the social sciences. Now, the reason why inignore ang social studies is, again, another fact. Social studies is badly taught. It's really badly taught. Dito sa UP, nagtuturo ako, retired na ako, pero I used to teach the GE history course. And history is, by and large, their worst subject. And the reason is simple, because they were just made to memorize. Pinamemorize lahat eh. So, siyempre, pagdating ng second grading, kinalimutan nila yung inaral sa first grading. Set naman. But tapos ang taon, so the value, the significance of things that are learned in class is not taught. And so that continues on. So policymakers think, well, it's not important. Kung yun lang ang gagawin, magme-memorize lang, bakit pa tuturo? Without realizing that fundamental competencies, where do you find evidence? How do you evaluate evidence? Kapani-paniwala ba yan? Pag sabihin ni so and so na ganyan, automatic ba na paniniwalaan ko? Ano bang basehan yan? How do I evaluate? How do I know if I can believe it or not? How do I, given this evidence, what conclusion can I logically infer?
It's true.
Not taught.
Kaya nga po ako.
Teachers are not taught to teach this. And then
Yeah.
there's one more thing I have to say, but this might upset some. In the course of my training teachers, and I've been doing this for decades, you will be surprised how many teachers like martial law. How many teachers believe it is a good thing. So I don't know if that's reinforced by the textbook or they reinforce what the textbook is, but that's their personal opinion. I'm not sure about the reason, but I remember this is before the pandemic. I do not know exactly what year, a year or so before the pandemic. Anyway, DepEd asked me to talk sa mga teachers again. So I did, and then I went back home. I learned after that the next session or one session after me ganyan, a big debate. It was all about martial law because many of the teachers are for it. So we all focus on our students, but I think that CEAP should not ignore your teachers because sila ang nagtuturo. Sila ang nasa classroom. Hindi yung principal, hindi yung may-ari ng school. It's the teachers. So let's pay attention also to the teachers. I think maybe if they were exposed to these facts, if they were trained, this is how you train critical thinking, things will improve.
And yeah, I guess a lot of our viewers are into the thinking po na kailangan talaga na tingnan yung mga nagtuturo ng history, no, yung mga AP teachers at lahat, even yung administrators nga. Kaya nga po ako sa isip ko rin po, alam niyo po ba na hindi rin ako mahilig sa history pero dahil ang apelyido ko ay Bonifacio, at sa unang araw pa lang po sa history, ay lagi po akong tinatawag ng guro. Kaya natuto ako magbasa ng Beyond the History book, na yung textbook. Kaya ako magbasa kasi lagi akong tinatawag, lalo na kung ang topic kay Rizal. Ako po lagi yung tatawagin because of my apelyido, no, Bonifacio. So doon ko nakita, doon ako nakabasa ng mga libro tungkol sa martial law kasi nga ako ay martial law baby 1973. Maganda yung experiences ko po, malayo sa lugar na magulo, wala naman akong kamag-anak na napasama dun sa martial law. So maganda ang tingin ko. Pero nung nakabasa na ako, nakakita, doon ko natutunan na iba pala yung martial law na nakuha ko dun sa actual na nangyari. So maaari pong ganun nga ang kakulangan ng ating nangyari nitong mga maraming taon na nagdas.
You know, sister, sa pag-lecture ko, meron din akong napulot na ugali na ganito. Yung may nagsasabi na, ano naman ang alam ng mga bata? Bakit sila galit sa martial law? Wala pa naman sila noon eh. So why are they so upset? Which is of course a silly way to argue things out. You know, I was not alive when Magellan came to the Philippines, okay? But I know about it. I study about it and I develop opinions about Spanish rule here and what they did. I do not have to be present in order to express an opinion. That's why we study. And that's the importance of history na you do not have to be, you didn't have to be around or alive at that time. I mean, like, do we have to be in Ukraine to have empathy with the people of Ukraine? I mean, this is the worst, and to me, it's almost an immoral kind of thinking because it shows that you have no empathy, you have no human sense of compassion, and that's terrible. That's certainly not the values that we teach our children.
So ang sarap niyo pong kausap. Actually, gusto ko pa makipag-usap but it's 10:54 already. So maraming salamat po. Personally, really, I gained a lot from your talk. No? Simula kami nag-umpisa tayo. And it pushed me to do something on the school setup. No? Kasi may magagawa naman tayo. Not only because of this election, but for the benefit of our young people and for the future. So as an ending po, Prof. Diokno, may I ask for your final message to our viewers.
Okay. I found this wonderful phrase by Reverend Raphael Warnock. He's an American pastor. I think he's now a legislator, but it maybe relates to what we are facing today. And he said, and I quote, "A vote is a kind of prayer about the kind of world you want to live in." And we have an opportunity to shape that world. This morning, we have been talking about history, which we cannot change because that's the past. Nangyari, naganap. Kailangan nating pag-aralan, maunawaan, maintindihan, suriin, pero hindi na nating mababago. But itong boto, it is a kind of prayer about the world we want to live in. So may pagkakataon tayong baguhin yung mundo na gusto nating magkaroon, world we want to live in. And I think that one we can change by our vote. So that's my parting word. Thank you.
Thank you so much po once again, Doc Diokno. And to synthesize this conversation, this sharing of our great Professor Maria Serena Diokno, I have this acronym BUSTER. No? Kasi busting martial law, sabi ko, I will use this BUSTER. Sabi nila, a BUSTER is a person or thing that breaks, destroys, or overpowers something. Ang association ko po ng buster, Ghostbuster. So B for both sides CEAP. So sabi ni Doc Diokno, Prof. Diokno, it does not mean fairness, not always equally valid, and it actually leads to false moral equivalence, moral relativism, and skepticism. So let's buster both sides CEAP. Number 2, U, let's buster understanding without critical thinking. Yun talaga yung pinagmumulan nun. And as teachers, i-avoid natin yung mga like and dislike lang. Punta tayo sa analysis, punta tayo sa question na why, in order for our students to learn how to critique even opinions based on evidences and facts. S is let's buster stories that are actually myths. Alam natin yan, napakinggan natin. Hindi ko na isa-isahin. T, let's do it together. Let's buster our textbooks. We have to level up. Sabi naman ni Professor Diokno, we don't need to do everything, di ba? We can add, sabi niya kanina. Napakaganda ng sagot ni, anong idea ni Doc Diokno kanina. And letter E, let's not buster evidences, but rather, sabi niya dito, let's gather, let's weigh, let's evaluate, let's infer, and let's conclude with the use of facts and evidences. And letter R for the last one, let's buster the reality designed or created by social media, by fake news, most importantly, specifically, I mean. And let's create the reality based on history, on facts, on evidences, so we can bring everyone to the real one, to the truth. So maraming salamat po. And before we end, may I just remind you again that you will receive the certificate of attendance only upon completion of the evaluation form. The link is already posted in the comment section of this page and on our Facebook page. Again, please note that the link is now live and will remain open until 5 p.m. today. We encourage you to answer the evaluation form and you will receive your certificate of attendance within the next 3 to 5 days. Again, the link is now live and will remain open until 5 p.m. today. Please note also that the PowerPoint slides will be made available at the CEAP website, www.ceap.org.ph, and ready for downloading. We would like to thank our web host, Raxo City, and we remind you to join us on other sessions related to upcoming elections. We have the Kwentuhang Halalan tomorrow at 11 a.m. streamed through Radyo Katipunan and cross-posted here in the CEAP Facebook page. And we also invite you to the Child Protection Summit on April 27 to April 29. Again, the power of the vote, the last words of Prof. Diokno, don't forget it. Napakalapit na po, May 9, 2022. On behalf of our President, Sister Marisa Viri, RVM, and the CEAP Board of Trustees, Mr. Jose Alan Arellano, the Executive Director, Ms. Mary Ann Cruz, the Deputy Director, and the National Secretariat of the CEAP. This has been Sister Aileen Bonifacio saying thank you and good morning. God bless us all.
Sa ikaw at ako, natuto sa prinsipyong punyo at serbisyong totoo. Kahalintulad ni Kristo, isang huwarang Katoliko. Pagkakaisa sa tulong at gawa, masasalamat alaala, pagpatago, ang misyon sa mundo, magagawa sa biyaya ni Kristo. Ang kabataan, may hamon at alay sa ating bayan, maging lingkod at tulad ng pagbabago sa misyon sa mundo. Virgen Maria, ang gabay at ang modelo. Sa mundong may bagong anyo, isang bansang may bagong sigla. Dahil sa ikaw at ako, natuto sa prinsipyong komunyo at serbisyo.